Joe, good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Dan. Good to catch up with you. I've enjoyed the conversation this morning you guys have had.
We'll get to that in a moment. Controversial and could be groundbreaking, but our I-team is on that report from Joe from his college days. Now, if you're Redskins management, what do you want to happen that best benefits the team with Kirk Cousins?
Well, I think you want to try and work out a deal that makes sense for everybody. And what it's a question I get all the time. What are the Redskins going to do with Kirk Cousins? It's almost like, what's Kirk Cousins going to do with the Redskins? Simply because the Redskins don't only have to sign Kirk. If they commit $24 million to him in a franchise tag, which they have, then you still have Deshaun Jackson, Pierre Garçon, Chris Baker. You still need defensive help on the other side of the ball. There's a lot of pieces that need to be put together on that football team and people that need to be signed to commit money to. Even though the cap's at 166, I would think that in earnest now they should start the negotiations up until July 15th, because after that he's committed. And the only negative on Kirk's side is, number one, Matt Cavanaugh has taken over as a coordinator. So I don't know if he's going to put the kind of numbers up, because Matt will probably want to run the football more. As a football team, they'll want to run the football more. So maybe you're not going to see 4,500 yards, which somebody will say, well, see, I told you he couldn't. But I think he's a franchise quarterback. I think he deserves somewhere between 110 and 120 million. But now it has to be spread out over a period of time. The big thing, Dan, is what's the bonus going to be and what's the injury guarantee? That's normally about 45 to 48% of the contract. Those are the guarantees. Take for example, Tony Romo's cap number is 24.7, 14 guaranteed. That's the end of a contract. Guys never see that. So I think the Redskins are trying to put together a deal where it works for them from a business standpoint, but also is fair to Kirk based on market value.
But how difficult is it to build a team around Kirk Cousins with that salary of Kirk Cousins?
Well, with the cap going to 166, it may not be that difficult. You're probably going to lose at least one of the receivers, Pierre or Deshaun. That's sort of a given. What's Chris Baker going to get as a defensive lineman? The big question is, what's it going to cost you in the free agent market to upgrade your secondary if you're going there? Because the draft now is insignificant when it comes to numbers. The draft numbers are so little. I mean, take a look at Dak's salary as an example. And by the way, Dak and Kirk were both fourth-round picks. I agree with you. You don't have to reach in any of these drafts. None of these kids coming out today, to me, warrant a first-round pick. Now, they'll go because of need, but nobody is really in the position to say, okay, that's the guy. I think they have to really seriously consider franchising Kirk, which I didn't think they would do, but they may have to just to buy a little more time.
We're talking to Joe Theismann. Yeah, I think it felt like Washington could have wrapped this up with Kirk Cousins last year. And I don't know if they were rolling the dice, Joe, of just saying, let's see if he can do it in back-to-back years. Is that the sense you get from what happened?
That is, and I think that was the sentiment that I felt from reading things and hearing things, that the organization said, let's see what you can do. Well, you're right. They rolled the dice, he rolled the dice, and he came up 7, and they came up craps at this point. But now, it's not to say that a deal can't be done. But what's impressive about this is, in this day and age where everybody wants to see what someone else is saying, you haven't heard a word out of Kirk's camp, and you haven't heard a word from the Redskins. And as long as there's silence, I think there's dialogue. When things start to get a little more public, then it becomes a little bit more of a problem.
Do you have any doubts about Kirk Cousins?
I don't. I think, we forget he's young. Yeah, everybody wants things right now. I mean, let's instant satisfaction. Everybody's saying, okay, let's see what Dak's going to do in his second year. And then, Kirk has to prove himself. I think he's proven himself. A quarterback like Kirk Cousins, there aren't many of them in the league, Dan. I mean, we have 32 football teams. There's probably a dozen of them that give you a chance to get to the playoffs and maybe have a shot at a championship. And young ones have to continue to develop. But you look at what Andrew Luck has gone through and the money they committed to him. I mean, that's going to be the that's going to be the contract that everybody's holding up and looking at and saying, hey, look at this number. You can't do that. I think each team has to look individually at what they can afford to do to support the organization to have a chance to win. I certainly think Kirk Cousins has, like I say, the value that I believe he is. He should be compensated in a fair way, but it's a two-way street. You have to understand that the organization needs people too, and it can't be all about you.
All right, settle this legendary story. Joe Theismann finishes runner-up for the Heisman in 1970.
1970, correct.
Okay, and as the story goes, the sports information director Roger
Baldessari.
yes, he ordered you to change your name because your name was Joe Theismann, and he said, let's change it to Theismann because it rhymes with Heisman. So walk me through this of when you got approached and then how it played out from there.
It was before my senior year. We'd had a really good junior year, so before my senior year, Roger calls me in the office. He said, Joe, how do you pronounce your last name? I said, it's Theismann. He said, no, it's not. It's now Theismann. I said, no, it's not. It's Theismann. He said, no, it's Theismann. So I said, give me the phone. So I picked up the phone, called my dad. And I get my dad on the phone. I said, Dad, I got a question for you. He said, fire away, Joey. Typical Jersey guy. Hey, fire away, son. I said, all right, Dad, how do you pronounce our last name? And there's like this silence on the phone. And my dad comes on. He says, are you okay? I mean, you're starting your senior year in college. You don't know how to pronounce your last name. What's going on? I said, I'll explain it later. Just tell me, how do you pronounce our last name? He said, Theismann. I said, I'll call you later. Hung it up. I said, Raj, look, my last name's Theismann. I know. I just got a phone with my dad. He said, Joe, there's a trophy out there called the Heisman Trophy. We think you have a chance to win that trophy, and we're going to sort of help you. We're not going to count on just your athletic ability nor the reputation of the University of Notre Dame. But we think just by changing the pronunciation of your last name from Theismann to Theismann to rhyme with Heisman, we think we can get you that trophy. Now, this is the question that was posed on your show a little bit earlier. Why didn't I change it back? Well, I called my grandmother, who was the matriarch of our family, and we're from Germany, and so I called my grandmother, and I said, Granny, look, they're thinking about changing the pronunciation of our last name from Theismann to Theismann. She said, well, Joey, let me tell you this. She said, the correct pronunciation is Theismann, and it's closer to it, so I'm okay with it. So I got the blessing from my grandmother, and that's why I kept the name where it is. So that's the whole story and the true story.
So it's Theismann.
It's Theismann. That's correct.
Theismann.
Yep.
And you finished
second. That doesn't rhyme with anything, by the way.
And you finished runner-up that year to
Jim Plunkett won it that year.
Yeah.
It was an interesting year in quarterbacks when you think about it. Archie Manning, Rex Kern out of Ohio State, Dennis Dummett out of UCLA, Chuck Hickson out of SMU, Dan Pastorini out of Santa Clara. Jim was at Stanford. I was at Notre Dame. It was when they talk about that class of '83 quarterbacks, but you have to go back a little bit. And we had a pretty decent class in '70 also.
Who had a better class?
Oh, we have more Super Bowls. You tell me.
Well, okay. The '84 draft had Elway and Marino.
Right.
Todd Blackledge, Tony Eason, Ken O'Brien. So it's a little top-heavy there.
Yep.
Because of Elway and Marino. And you guys, so it's you and Plunkett, Pastor. Who else was in there at one Super Bowls? So
nobody.
So you and Plunkett. Okay, so you guys got 3.
Yep.
Yeah. Man.
See? It's an interesting comparison of class.
I think Elway's the best quarterback of all time.
You think he's the best of all time?
Well, okay, Brady's the most decorated. I'm talking about athleticism at that position, what he was doing when he was doing it with an offense that wasn't very good. And I think Elway, I don't have a problem. If you want Brady and I get Elway, I'm okay with that. Or vice versa. I just, for a long period of time, I always thought Elway was the best quarterback I ever saw.
I think that's a fair assessment and an excellent explanation as to why you believe that. I think Tom is. And the reason I say that is I look at the people that he has played with. I thought Howie Long did a great job in one of the pregame shows during the Super Bowl and sort of highlighted the amount of change that has occurred around Tom's position.
Yep.
46 different receivers, I think 30-some running backs. But yet the constant there has been Tom Brady. Now, normally I would say, and this goes over to what you were talking about, trading Kirk Cousins to San Francisco. I always believe that the quarterback position is the single most dependent position on the field. And in Tom's case, he becomes sort of the antithesis to that because he is the most important thing that's held, I think, that franchise, he and Coach Belichick. But I listen, going to Kirk Cousins one more time, to trade him to San Francisco would be foolish on the 49ers' part because
Absolutely.
They need so many more things.
Absolutely.
I think that would just because you want to marry somebody up with a coordinator that knows them. As a matter of fact, if Colin Kaepernick winds up staying in San Francisco, which I think he will, remember Kyle Shanahan had Robert Griffin III in Washington when he came out, so they're somewhat similar in their athletic skills and their ability. I think Colin actually throws better out of the pocket than Robert has because he hasn't had a chance to grow into it. But Kyle has something to work with Cap out there. And Gabbard as well. So he's got, they've got quarterbacks. It's not like they need so many more pieces around it.
He's Joe Theismann. Joe, great to talk to you again. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Dan. Always a fun.
Joe Theismann.
The Dan Patrick Show, weekday mornings on Audience.